Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the second hour of the show. Isn't Michael fascinating? So we're going to be continuing our conversation, but don't forget Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. And please do check out the Just Energy Radio website, www.justenergyradio.com, to sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep you informed of all of the shows that are coming up. Sorry, got a little distracted there. As well as you can check out our over 6 years or over 5 years of archives. Also, Just Energy Radio is now being put on YouTube, and so you can all stream it in your car, listen to me, my good guests, and also new book, Man-Made, Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. It's cool. You'll like it. Check it out, www.manmade, the Chronicles. And so let's get Michael back on the air. Michael, you there?
I'm here.
Yay. So before we went to break, you started talking about mankind and the genetics of mankind. But let's start here. Where do you think this creation, this development of humanity took place?
Well, there are various references in the Sumerian tablets from the work of Sitchin that refer to southern Africa let me rather rephrase it. They refer to this place called the abzu, and the abzu has been given many meanings and ascribed many meanings by various researchers and scholars and so forth. But one of the places that meanings that was ascribed to this place called the abzu is where the gold came from. And so, my take on it was, well, if we can find the evidence of where the gold came from, then there can be no more doubt or question about where the abzu was. And my discovery of this vanished civilization here and the huge gold mining operation with advanced technology, etc., that now puts that argument to rest as far as I'm concerned. This is it. Southern Africa is where the abzu was, or where they refer to in the Sumerian tablets as the abzu, where the gold came from, or the land below the equator. And this is also where they started messing around with the genetic experiments. And there are two specific sites. One of the important sites is the serpent worship site in Botswana, northern Botswana, just below the Okavango swamps and the Okavango water extended water flows and so forth, that it's called Sodilo Hills. And when I went there, I was just so absolutely blown away. As you arrive at Sodilo Hills, it's very flat. Botswana was probably an inland ocean a long time ago, and it's a beautiful country. The Kalahari is there as well, a large part of the Kalahari. And in African language, it's called the Khalakadi, which plays a very important role in human origins and ancient human history and so forth. But as you approach Sodilo Hills, suddenly in the middle of this flat land, there's this big mountain sticking out of nowhere. And as you approach it, there's a big sign that says, Mountain of the Gods. It's like...
Wait, there's a sign right there.
Yeah. There's a sign on the new gate, Mountain of the Gods. It's just spectacular, And Zachariah Sitchin called it. He said this is where the Anunnaki had their labs and their special hidden places that they worked. Well, they didn't have to hide from anybody really, unless they were hiding from some other advanced beings that they might have been fighting with and having battles with, because that's also possible. We hear about these gods, the battle of the gods in the sky, and it's not necessarily the battles between the Anunnaki themselves, but it could have also been battles between the Anunnaki and other beings that were trying to take control of this planet. We don't know enough about that yet, and I guess that side of it will be exposed to us as we keep our minds open and explore, keep exploring. So what's fascinating is that that's where one of the oldest human sites is on Earth, and even this particular site is recognized by modern archaeologists I'm talking about mainstream, often very conservative archaeologists and historians that refer to Tsadilo Hills as the serpent worship site, and they date it to be about 75,000 years old, which is spectacular because in those days, according to mainstream history, mankind were living in caves and there were probably not that many people around on planet Earth. Well, I have news for them. That's not the case. There were millions of people around, and the physical evidence here in Southern Africa is the support and the scientific support for the fact that there was a very densely populated part of the world with probably about 50 million people that were living here. That kind of information is just too much for some people to handle. But unfortunately for them, you can't argue with the physical evidence. You got more than 10 million, probably closer to 20 million circular stone structures and ruins left behind, clustered together in these large clusters and all joined together by channels and what are often referred to as roads by ignorant historians and archaeologists. And you realize that we're dealing with something that no one has ever seen before, no one has ever given any thought to, but this is what Sitchin has been referring to in all of his work. So when you ask about the genetic cloning, that is the one place, the serpent worship site, and that is distinctly filled with the energetic imprint of Enki and the Sumerian sort of deity royalty, and his sister Ninhursag and his son Ningizida, who seem to be very active in the genetic cloning process as well. His sister Ningizida, who I believe was where we get the word mummy or mama from, that is still being used globally for mother. She was the primordial mother. And the other place that has now been playing a very important role in all of this research is what I called Adam's calendar. Now, this is a fascinating site, and this is where the other genetic cloning activities took place. Specifically, the one event that took place there, which was the actual creation of the human race. Now, the story of Adam's calendar is really an interesting one because it was rediscovered by Johann Heine in 2003 by sheer fluke and accident, by sheer luck, should I say. Because if Johann hadn't discovered that and hadn't seen it from the aeroplane, the story is that, first of all, a little bit of background about Johann, a brilliant mind, out-of-the-box thinker, widely read, and he set up the firefighting industry in South Africa that now runs many aircraft and helicopters for the forestry fires, the control of forest fires, and so forth. So, and he's been flying around Southern Africa and other parts of Africa for 25 years or more. And one of his pilots went down in 2003, ran out of fuel, believe it or not, tried to do an emergency landing, and crash landed on the top of this mountain, and went down the edge of the cliff. He survived it, but they sent out a search party for him the next morning, and they found him stranded on the edge of the cliff, clinging with a broken arm and so forth. So as they were flying, trying to figure out how to get him down, Johann noticed this strange collection of rocks on the edge of a cliff, not far from where the pilot was sitting, waiting to be rescued. And he made a note of this, saying, hold on, this is not just a normal bunch of rocks. This is a very strange group of rocks. They look like they were placed there for a specific purpose by some humans. So after the rescue mission and all that, he came back and he started looking at this site and measuring it, and lo and behold, discovered that the stones were placed in alignment with the solstices and equinoxes, with the north, south, east, west movement of rising and setting of the sun, and started finding some spectacular information that this was actually a man-made site. And I met Johan in early 2007, and I was one of the first or few people that he shared this information with. Everyone he shared that information with up to that point just completely, ridiculed him and disregarded his research and evidence. And I was the first person to take him seriously on this, and I started working with him on the site and rapidly reaching new, startling discoveries and conclusions because of the discoveries we made there. Very soon we found a grave just north of the site, which we now believe is to be Dumuzi's grave, which is Enki's youngest son, and there's a whole story behind that I'll share with you. But my conclusion, I haven't worked with Johan on that for about 2 years now, or maybe even longer, but I've started doing my own research and my own work because Johan has just been too busy. And what I discovered is when I wrote the book Adam's Calendar after I realized that I need to get this information out to the world because this is a spectacular site and it has very strong links to the origins of humankind. I just somehow instinctively knew this. So I came up with the name Adam's Calendar because I believe that it was one of the oldest man-made sites on Earth, oldest sites linked to human origins. And nowhere in my wildest dreams would I have known how close to the truth I would be by calling it Adam's Calendar. Because when I met with Baba Creda Mutwa, who is the preeminent Zulu shaman, known for his brilliant writing and his expose on African knowledge and the deep secrets carried by the African shaman, which I believe got him into a lot of trouble for sharing that information, but I think it was crucial that he did, otherwise that information would be suppressed by the authorities. It is believed and it is known, this site called Adam's Calendar is known by ancient African knowledge keepers, by shaman and other traditional healers and so forth, and the Sangomas here. It is known to be the place where humanity was created by the gods. It is referred to by Creda Mutwa as the place where heaven mated with Mother Earth. Now, when he told me this in my early days of research, I didn't quite understand what he meant. What it later turned out to be is that is where the Anunnaki actually performed and did the insertion of the fertilization of the first Anunnaki females with a new hybrid species called the human race. And these first females then gave birth to this new species called Homo sapien or Adamu, and therefore it is appropriately called Adam's Calendar because that is where Adam was first created or cloned or impregnated or whatever you want to call it.
Manufactured.
And that, yeah. And it's also known as Inzalo Yelanga in Zulu. And Inzalo Yelanga means birthplace of the sun. And birthplace of the sun not necessarily meaning S-U-N as in the rising of the sun, but the S-O-N, birthplace of the son of the gods, or human. And so all this information is so deeply encoded in all the ancient cultures, and right here we are coming face to face with the site that was turned into a ritual site because that's where they seem to have had this ritual where they impregnated the Anunnaki females with the new DNA structure that brought forth humanity. And, when I take people on tour to Adam's Calendar and the tour of the ruins and the sites around where I live now in the little town of Waterval-Boven in Mpumalanga, the province of Mpumalanga, I live pretty much right in the center of these ruins. And that's why it's very easy for me to just go up the mountain and walk around and do research and find things. Every time I go up the mountain, I find new things, discover new tools, new artifacts. But just recently, we found a sword in some of these ruins that can be linked to Moorish and Arabic cultures. And you find that the cycle of civilizations that have come through Southern Africa is so long and so vast, and it covers so many diverse civilizations and cultures that it truly boggles the mind. And this is where I feel so sorry for the narrow-minded and ill-informed, historians and archaeologists that don't have much a broader view than what they were taught at university, and then they carry on with that knowledge as a base. They just can't make any sense of this because it goes back so long. And rule number one of archaeology is that civilizations build on top of each other. So different people have come through these ancient structures for thousands and thousands and thousands of years and reused them over and over and over again. And you see some incredible evidence of this piling up of relics and artifacts. And as I mentioned, one of the most recent discoveries is the spectacular metal sword that probably goes back maybe as far back as 2000 BC. Until we get enough funds and until we get enough, well, when I say we, I mean I, because I'm the guy doing the research. There is no we. So until I get more funds or find some, money so I can, put a decent research team together and decent technology to study these tools and artifacts, it's just speculation. It's probably not far off the field, because the more of these things you discover, the more of a complete picture you start to get. And the picture that I have, I think, is a lot more complete than anyone else has worked in this particular field, because I've been doing this now for 5 years on site every day. No one else can make those kind of claims.
Well, I mean, the part that I find really sad is you have all of this indigenous wisdom that has come down to us, and academia just says, that can't be right. Yeah.
Well, of course it can't be right. They can't understand it. And, when you start talking to these people that have narrower views, and you start talking to them about source, energy fields and double toroid vortex energy fields and quantum physics and quantum mechanics and metaphysics and, thought materialization, and you start talking about time travel and dematerialization and stuff like that, and the laws of nature and sacred geometry, you lose them within 60 seconds. They look at you and you just see this blank stare on their face and they just lose you. But then they don't want to come across stupid or ignorant, so they always fob it off with some wise-ass, comment and move on to something stupid or something nonsensical. But I just find it really sad. Clearly there are a lot of great minds and great people in academia, but what drives them? Fear. What did we speak about earlier before the break? Fear. All of humanity is motivated and driven by fear. Most of humanity, let's rephrase that. And so are these academics. They fear for their jobs. They fear for losing the security to provide for their families. And that's where you see the spectacular deception, how we've been caught up in this socio-political system that we're trapped in. There is no way out unless you lose all your fear. Lose fear of everything there is to lose fear of. Only then can you liberate yourself from that. And I speak from experience. Every now and then I start getting these little fears that creep up, and I have to keep reminding myself, stop that, Tillinger. Stop behaving like all these fearful people. Go out there, be bold. Don't fear anything.
And it's hard because the powers that be just try to instill fear. I mean, I don't know how it is, in South Africa, but here in the U.S., it's something every day that they're, trying to make you be afraid of. It's like, you can eat bacon. No, you can't eat bacon. You can do this. No, you can't do that. And they have people so confused that they don't even know what to do anymore.
Oh, absolutely. And that's part of the confusion that they're so good at. They sow this confusion, so it just adds more fear. I was astounded in America as well, traveling there. I've traveled extensively, as you know, through the United States. I've probably seen more of the USA than anybody will ever see in their lives because of the tours that I've done there and driving throughout the entire United States and Canada as well. I think I've done more than 100,000 kilometers throughout the United States. It's like going around the world more than twice.
Wow.
And what I found fascinating is what you said, Rita, is the fear. People don't eat salt, for example, in the United States. I noticed that. That's the one thing that immediately caught my attention. Nobody wants to eat salt. And I realized that that's the fear that's been, instilled in the people. Oh, salt is bad for you. Don't eat salt. When in fact the opposite is true. All these things, salt causes problems and heart disease and heart attacks and all this, when actually the opposite is true. And if you eat the right salt, it actually lengthens your life. And when you start studying these things, you realize it's part of the great deception. Eggs are really bad for you, high cholesterol. No, it's not. It's actually the opposite. And so it goes. So everything was being shoved down our throats. It's probably the opposite that is true. And then they start sowing the confusion. But just to bring it back to the control very briefly, and the royal political elite that we mentioned before the break, the bloodlines that have controlled the planet and established the monetary systems and the legal systems that completely and utterly enslave us. They're so convoluted and so complex that nobody could possibly understand it in their wildest dreams. It is insane how complex these systems have become, and how they use these to abuse humanity, to abuse each and every one of us beyond our wildest beliefs. But that control, there are some spectacular indicators in the Sumerian tablets that show us at which point in humanity that control started. And that was highlighted by Zechariah Sitchin, but it's not necessarily his translation, because this information comes to us from what are known as the clay tablets, Sumerian clay tablets that are known as the king's lists. And there are several king's lists that have been found. And some of them are fascinating because they carry exactly the same information from different times, different places, and yet these king's lists tell us exactly the same information about 8 kings that ruled the world for over 220,000 years. They tell us what their names were, they tell us where they lived and what parts of the world they ruled. And then it tells us 2 very important things. It tells us in these kings lists that when kingdom was lowered to earth from heaven, and kings and priests were appointed to rule over humanity, and it's at that moment you realize that this great deception started. When the gods, the Anunnaki, the Elohim, came down from the skies, they found the humans among the human population that they chose, their chosen ones. They made them the priest kings. They gave them specific advanced knowledge and information with which they could rule over humanity. That advanced knowledge and information was pretty advanced because it contained knowledge of alchemy, of wizardry, of sacred chanting, of all that kind of stuff that we still see in these mysterious and movies and, about wizards and ancient priest kings and so forth. All that stuff is true. And we get it in the Sumerian tablets. They tell us very clearly when kingdom was lowered to earth from heaven. And when this happened, this seems to have happened after the flood. It also tells us, and then the flood came. Right? So this information is very, very important to put a timeline together and see when this control of humanity started and these royal political bloodlines first make their appearance. So they go back thousands of years and nothing has changed. We are being controlled more and more by these bloodlines of human beings that have been controlling and enslaving humanity for what seems to be an eternity.
Well, and it's interesting that you point to the flood as the initiating factor because, in Judaism, they talk about that God gave Noah the first set of laws, which is right after the flood, obviously, that have actually come down to today, which preceded the Ten Commandments, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's exactly how it seems to have happened. That's when you get two major epochs in human history, and that's the pre-Diluvian or pre-flood period that we know very little about, other than probably the research that I'm doing here in Southern Africa. Well, there's a lot of other stuff going on as well, but this is where we find some real tangible evidence of the gold mining activity that happened for 280,000 years or 270,000 years before the flood came. So that's by far the longest period of human history that we have facing us with physical, tangible evidence of what was going on here. And then the flood came. And then we have the second part of human history, and that's the post-Diluvian or post-flood era, as you say, when God gave the first set of commandments and rules, or let's not call them commandments, the first set of rules and laws to Noah, or Ziusudra as he was called in the Sumerian texts, and Atrahasi, the Babylonian, right? And so this is where things suddenly change, and the control of humanity starts. And again, the story of Noah and the flood is a spectacular example of how you can separate the God with a big G and the gods, the malicious, controlling gods with a small g. Because what happens when Noah lands on dry land? If you know your Bible, you'll know that one of the first things he does when he comes out of the ark, he takes one of the sheep or two of the sheep, I don't know how many exactly, and he has a barbecue. And he slaughters the sheep that he's just preserved in the ark so that he can have a barbecue and make a burnt offering for the Lord, for the gods. And it says that God smelled the pleasing aroma of Noah's barbecue. And he came down from the sky and had some of that barbecue. I mean, it's just insane.
Well, I just think it's interesting that in cultures worldwide, the gods like the burnt offering and that sacrificial rite, but they don't really talk about the gods eating anything. They didn't have, a pulled pork sandwich or anything, but they like the smell, which to me is weird.
Yeah, but of course they liked it. I mean, the tabernacle, that is the perfect example of when the gods, the Anunnaki would come down and have a big feast. And the very, very detailed description of how to build the tabernacle, where they would have to, the special area they built for the Ark of the Covenant, right? And the kind of cloth they had to use and the thread they had to use, everything you see and you read into that, you realize that they were creating shields, like electromagnetic or shields for electromagnetic radiation or some other forms of radiation that was coming out of the Ark of the Covenant, and to protect the people and to protect themselves probably as well. But then the instructions to Aaron, Moses' brother, right, Aaron, which is an interesting thing, is still, that whole Moses story is just so fascinating. Who Moses really was, who Aaron must have been if he was his brother, his relationship to the royal family in Egypt and the pharaohs, and how Akhenaten plays a possible role in Moses' history and Moses' life. Was it his brother? Was it his cousin? Was Moses and Akhenaten the same being? All these questions start popping up, and are really important questions for people to consider, because it's very, very murky. Clearly, Moses was an advanced, highly advanced being, and he must have been trained in the mystery schools of Egypt, coming from the royal family, and he would have known alchemy and the practicing of wizardry and alchemy, and this is why he understood how to turn gold into the white powder of gold when he burnt the calf. And when he came down from the mountain and burned the calf in the fire and turned it into white powder and made the Israelites drink it. It's a dead giveaway that he knew alchemy and how to use the white powder of gold for treatment of disease and treatment of, preventing people from going insane and so forth. And malnutrition and keep them healthy, because they obviously weren't a very clean bunch of people being stuck in the desert for so long without much water and much sanitation. So you can imagine they weren't, pretty, and they didn't smell too good. So, and probably riddled with disease. So that whole thing is fascinating. But the building of the tabernacle and then the instructions to Aaron, who, if you read the Bible, was the spokesperson for Moses. And this is another interesting thing, because it says that Moses had a speech impediment and that he had to communicate with God through Aaron, his brother. It's just so confusing. And on the other hand, he's shown as this eloquent guy who led the whole, Jewish nation out of slavery and was well-spoken and eloquent. And the two just don't wash. They're these two different faces of Moses. But let me come back to the tabernacle, because and the burnt offerings, because there's another great example there, where Aaron is given these specific instructions of where to put the altar on which the burnt offerings were to be prepared and barbecued, basically, right? You're having a barbecue for the gods, and then it was he was only allowed in one certain area, and then the food had to be closed in behind another sacred wall, and nobody was, not even him, was allowed to go in there. There was the Holy of Holies, right? And only the gods were allowed in there, and that's what they would have their feast, and they would call for exactly what they wanted, what kind of fruits they would want, what food they would want, and Aaron would have to prepare that for the gods. And they would come down and they would have their feast and eat the burnt offerings. And then it says there, you better put salt on my burnt offerings. This is another thing that God demands. He demands that Aaron puts salt on his burnt offerings. And if he doesn't put salt on his burnt offerings, he will surely smite, I will surely smite you and destroy you, because I like my burnt offerings with salt.
See, I like saying that God says, you're going to die. It sounds better, Yeah,
you're going to die. Well, you know what? I got news for you, God. I know that already. You don't have to remind me, So it's another big aha moment for people to separate the God with a big G, the divine creator of all things, the entire universe and all things in it, that source energy field, and the gods with a small g that just messed with the humanity and abused us and continue to abuse us today.
I think that if anybody that's interested, read the Old Testament, at least, through Exodus, maybe a little bit further on, but those first two books, and change the word God to alien, and it is a completely different read. And then I also challenged them, because I found this interesting, read the book of Revelation and use the word alien, because you read the book of Revelation and it really seems like this all-out takeover by the gods for control of the earth. And not some story that's supposed to happen in the future, but a story that already happened and they're just retelling it. John of Patmos is just retelling it.
Yeah. It's also, however, filled with advanced knowledge and encoding of the archetypes that seem to represent the laws of nature and the nature of reality. And these archetypes that we find encoded in the tarot cards and the sacred cards from the Egyptian mystery schools that I believe are probably the earliest versions and the earliest forms of the tarot cards, and you start seeing some very important information encoded in that. The fact that there are 22 major cards in the tarot, major arcana. There are 22 books, 22 chapters in the book of Revelations. There are 22 letters of the original alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, even the Greek alphabet. We originally had 22 pairs of chromosomes as the new species. We can come back to that because that's a shock to a lot of people. We did not have 23 chromosomes like we have today, 23 pairs of chromosomes. 22 over 7 is the ratio of the diameter to a circle, which is approximation of pi, and there are 22. If you look at the Kabbalah tree, the tree of knowledge and life. There are 22 links between the 10 nodal points that make up the Kabbalah tree. It's just there are 22 primary frequencies that seem to be present in the universe, out of which all things come, or 22 primary frequencies that they found in the reverse engineered chair from the crashed UFO in the Montauk project. And 22 becomes a very important number in all of human history and all of what seems to be the nature of reality around us. And what I suspect, this is just a hunch, in the paradigm that we're in the dimension that we find ourselves in this reality, on this planet right now, in this reality, that 22 plays a very important role. And it's fascinating. And the book of Revelation plays a very important part in decoding that and presenting us with those archetypes that are deeply encoded in the tarot cards, with pretty much all the knowledge of the universe and the laws of nature that we find in it. It's spectacular.
Well, and I just think, I think it's interesting that you're bringing up this 22 number because, in numerology, 22 is a sacred number, but why is it a sacred number? Probably because it was an important number to the gods. Well, because the gods, just like we, are just advanced beings that come from the same source that we come from the source of unity consciousness, the unified field, the unity out of which everything comes. So they're made up of the same stuff that everything else is made up in the physical projected universe. So they will know through their advanced knowledge and technology. They use that advanced knowledge and technology because they understand a lot more about the laws of nature, right? And the laws of nature and the sacred geometry that makes up this physical universe. And it is in the sacred geometry that we find all the relationships, all the ratios that drive and are responsible for the interactions that make up the chemistry and the physics and the mathematics that we can then use to try and understand these laws of nature that sacred geometry gives us. And this is spectacular. So, when you speak to physicists and mathematicians and nuclear physicists, and you start bringing sacred geometry into their arguments, if they have not been exposed to sacred geometry, they very quickly realize that it is a great missing piece that they need to introduce into their work. And for those that do, make great discoveries. For those that don't, just go round and round in circles, and they will never get out of that. It's like a hamster on a wheel, But I'm looking at the clock, and we still have some time, but not tons of time. But I want you to go back. You kind of spurred my interest about this 23 chromosome thing.
Yeah. Look, the whole thing about our DNA and what DNA does is just changing so rapidly. In the last 3 to 5 years, our understanding of the DNA and the chromosomes has changed so rapidly and so quickly that now what we believe it to be is totally different. And there's absolutely no doubt that we originally had 22 pairs of chromosomes, because when the Homo sapien or Adamu or Adam was first cloned and created, he was cloned with an understanding of sacred geometry, and 22 is a central number in that sacred geometry. And as you said, it's a sacred number, right? At 22. And so the Anunnaki understand. They're masters of manipulating sacred geometry and using it as a source of energy and a tool for them. So they would have used that to create a being that was, in a sense, in harmony with the laws of nature, but they could control it through the DNA that they manipulated, right? As the Sumerian tablets refer to it through Sitchin's translation, they refer to DNA as I believe far more eloquently and far more accurately. We deoxyribonucleic acid, that's what we call it. What the hell does that mean? It's some stupid scientific term that has absolutely no meaning to what it really is. And the Sumerian tablets, the Anunnaki, refer to as the entwined essence, the entwined essence of what it is that we are. And I believe that's a far more descriptive, accurate description of what DNA really is. So the entwined essence, which can probably also be seen in the symbol of Enki or the caduceus, the symbol of medicine, those two snakes that spiral around each other, but that also could represent many other things. The DNA is completely different to what we originally thought. All it is really it actually is activated by light and sound, and its structure and its formation can be traced to a crystalline nature, because the protein that makes up the DNA and everything that makes it up actually gets broken down to a crystalline structure. And what do crystals do? Crystals are carriers of knowledge, information. They store knowledge, they store information, and they carry and transmit that knowledge and information. Right? That's why crystals play such important parts in all of esoteric science and knowledge, and have been used forever in those fields. So we have these carriers of knowledge and stored information in the nucleus of every cell in our body, that is like an antenna for cosmic light and cosmic sound frequencies that activate that DNA. And I would refer people listening to this to find William Brown. William Brown is just the brightest shining light in this field of nuclear and genetic research. He is a spectacular mind. He lives in Hawaii. I had the fortune of meeting him and spending a lot of time with William here in Johannesburg and out at my place in the mountains, in the ruins, among the ruins of Enki. And he came and he did a presentation at the UFO Science and Consciousness Conference in Johannesburg last November. He was one of the 14 speakers that I got out here. And when you listen to his presentation, your jaw is going to drop. You're not going to believe what you hear, because it is everything we've been told by psychics for years and years and years can now be shown scientifically, and William Brown delivers that knowledge and that information absolutely brilliantly.
Well, I just wrote his name down on my scheduling sheet, so maybe we'll have to contact him to get him on the show.
Oh, you've got to do that. He's young. He's not even 30 years old, so he's just such a brilliant mind and just such a joy to talk to, because he's got such an open mind. And, he'll explain to you everything that we've been trying to understand from a metaphysical and the sort of what has been poo-pooed by mainstream academia, metaphysics and, psychic abilities and all that. He'll explain to you exactly how all that stuff works, very basically from the quantum physics perspective, and how it all connects to our DNA, and how our DNA interacts with all of this, with a morphogenic field, how it all connects, how we're connected to everything in the universe, everywhere, at all times. We just don't know it, because our DNA has been messed with. Who messed with it? The gods messed with it. And that's why we are dumbed down species. So we were created to take instructions, to follow instructions, to be able to repeat orders and execute the orders we've been given, so that we don't get bored and we don't forget what we get told. That means they had to give us a large frontal lobe. And this is why we have a much larger frontal lobe than most of the other Homo erectors and other hominid creatures that came before us. And we are suddenly distinctly different from the other hominids that came before us, because we could execute all these functions that we were created for. And when they first created the humans, they gave us 22 pairs of chromosomes. William Brown will show you the scientific evidence for those 22 pairs of chromosomes. And for several thousands of years, they cloned humans. And I've got the cloning tanks that are found here in southern Africa. But cloning tanks, hexagonal structures, like where bees put their larvae in, the beautiful hexagonal-shaped honeycombs, right? That's exactly what they look like. The stone structures here among the stone ruins. They were the cloning tanks for these early humans. They were cloning them from fetus to adult human in 9 months. And they were taken out, and they were only males. They were only cloning males. And for people that are new to this information, this is going to sound horrific. And it sounds like all those sci-fi movies that we've seen where they're cloning these humanoids, in dark underground chambers in these huge amniotic sacs. Well, that's exactly what I am talking about. And they were cloning male human beings to work in the gold mines in the abzu, because that's what we were created for. If you think anything else about the early days of humanity, you got the wrong end of the stick. And it was only when they realized that they needed more of these slaves, and they couldn't clone them fast enough because there weren't enough of the Anunnaki here. There were only a small number of the Anunnaki and the the Nephilim and the offspring of the Anunnaki. But in the beginning days, it was just the Anunnaki that were looking after these gold mining fields, and they couldn't clone them fast enough. They realized they had to create a female partner for the humanoid or Adam, and this is where Eve enters, and this is where they took the Adam's rib, the great story in the Bible where Adam was put into a deep sleep, and they took his rib. Well, what did they do? They just performed a little surgical experiment there. They took the bone marrow from his rib, I guess, and from the bone marrow they extracted the DNA and they created a female and it's at that point that they create the male and the female chromosome, the X and the Y chromosomes, the sex chromosomes, and they create Eve, and they put them into this garden of Eden that is, so glorified as this beautiful place for Adam and Eve that God created. Yes, the gods did create the Garden of Eden for Adam and Eve, but not because it is for them to live and frolic and have a beautiful life. It was for them to see if Adam and Eve would copulate, and if they could procreate, and if they could bear babies, and if the female wouldn't eat the male after they copulated, like many species do. And the plot just thickens. And it's at that point that we see 23 chromosomes emerge in humanity.
Well, and there are some people that say, the Bible has two creation of man stories. And in the first one, it says, and male and female, he created them. And there are some people that have been led to believe, you're saying male only. There are some people that have speculated that they were hermaphroditic or sexless.
Yeah, and it's quite probable that they were sexless, hermaphroditic. I would go along with that. And only later did they create man and woman and woe man, right? Whoa, man, what's that?
So do you think that, or actually, let me rephrase this. Do you think that the gods still have an agenda for us? And do you have any speculation what that agenda might be?
That's a tough one. Well,
that's why I said you can speculate.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the agenda is. I do believe that beings like Enki and even Enlil, from the latest information I've been given by psychics and people that channel information from these beings, I've been fortunate enough to have 2 channel sessions with Enki himself, and what I have been told is that I have a very strong connection to Enki himself, and that I'm some sort of a reincarnation or an aspect, an aspect of Enki to bring this information forth. And then suddenly it all starts to make sense to me. This is why I'm the guy that's making all these discoveries here, because it is Enki's creation. This is his playground. This is his gold mining empire, and I'm the guy that's finding it and finding it very easy to somehow string all this stuff together. So I must be some sort of an energetic aspect of that being or that entity, because it's very easy for me to put it together. And I'm finding these things, every time I go out. Every time I open a book, I find another link. It's very interesting. But so I believe Enki and Enlil have joined the ranks of the light side, or the light workers, if you want to call them that. And and they're trying to make up or fix the mess that they created, and they're helping humanity from being this enslaved, dumbed down species to find enlightenment and find understanding, so that we can start making sense of this crazy world that we've been in, and help to help us to find enlightenment and higher, rapid growth of consciousness towards enlightenment, where we free ourselves from the entrapment and from the karmic trap that seems to have been set for humanity, and that's another thing. You know, this karmic trap that some people believe that karma is a natural order of things in the universe. I mean, it's the most insane thought that anyone could have. How could God, the divine creator, create beings that don't remember who they are? They're part of the universal divine creation, and when they create it, they don't know that they come from source. So, you know, for those that believe that karma is the natural order of things, that is not so. Karma is a karmic trap that was created for the souls that occupy human bodies, and once they occupy a human body on this planet in this time, that's the big trap, and that's probably one of the greatest sins, if you can use the word sin, that was committed against all of creation, is this karmic trap that was set or for souls that inhabit human bodies, and that is one of the channelings that I found very, very fascinating. This is information. This is amazing how this information comes at you from the weirdest places, right? Knowing everything I know. And before we finish here, I must tell you what Adam's calendar is actually all about, because it's linked to gold, our enslavement, our creation, but also the most advanced technological ancient site that we have.
Okay, because we only have 3 minutes.
Okay. The karmic trap is basically was created by the Anunnaki, and a bit of information that I got from some advanced ETs is that the Anunnaki committed a great sin against all of creation. And a lot of the ETs that are of a higher consciousness, that are working, trying to help us come into enlightenment and higher consciousness, have actually referred to the Anunnaki as being cast out of the book of life because of the great sin that they've committed against all of creation by creating this karmic trap energy field here on planet Earth and possibly other planets. I also believe this is not the only planet they did this. They came here for gold. They started mining gold in vast quantities. You cannot even imagine the amount of gold they've taken off this planet. How did they take it off this planet? Zechariah Sitchin tells us they beamed it skywards with sky ships. I think there was a misunderstanding and misinterpretation, because this is the latest information I have and scientific conclusion I reach from Adam's calendar. The energy fields that are measured there are so strong and so mind-blowing that the tools and the electronic instruments that we're measuring them with cannot measure the extent of the electromagnetic fields, the sound frequencies, the heat signatures, and everything else we measure there.
Michael, your signal is breaking all up.
That knows what I'm talking about.
Okay, so Michael, I can't hear you, so I'm just going to talk. We have 1 minute left, and so unless you reappear magically, I'm just going to go ahead and give people your information. So Michael's new book, Slave Species of God, it is available through obviously Amazon.com, et cetera, et cetera. He has a couple of other books, but you can all go to his website, michaeltellinger.com. You know, I wish he was here because maybe he could tell me, and maybe he can text me a message if he's going to be doing another U.S. tour, because his presentations are great, super nice guy, always a wonderful opportunity to meet him. And so, again, his website is michaeltellinger.com. His website is, or his book is Slave Species of God. And he's not texting me, so I'm wondering if he's not hearing me. Oh, there you are. Michael, you back?
Can you hear me, Rita?
I can.
Coming through?
Yeah.
All right. So just very briefly, Adam's calendar is a double toroid vortex energy field. It is too spectacular for words. I must tell you, it is unbelievable. The energy fields there go off the charts. We cannot measure them with the tools available to us on Earth today. They go off the charts.
I believe that.
The only conclusion I can reach.
Yep. Lost him again, but the music's going to be
coming.
There I am. Michael, the music's going to be coming up in a second, and one of the questions I had, I kind of mentioned your book, is are you going to be coming back to the U.S. anytime soon?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I'll be at the Pythagoras conference from the 10th to the 14th October.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let you go. Michael, thank you so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure having you here. You know I love you. And so next week, we're going to have a fun show. We have David Roundtree and Thomas Fusco, previous guests of our show, that are teaming up together, which is kind of a scary thought, talking about Einstein's ghost and scientific theories. It's a show that will be interesting to have. Anyway, till next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita. Until next time, remember, it's all just energy.